Okay, welcome. Um, just thought I'd make a little video about a project which I'm going to attempt today, which concerns this Browning T-bolt. If you don't know the T-bolt, it's available in, I think, two calibers, 17 HMR, 22 LR. There may be a 22 WMR version, but if so, I've not seen that one. It's an innovative rimfire, really, as it's a bolt action, but it's a straight pull bolt. Supposed to be faster, supposed not to force you to take your eye away from the line of the scope while reloading. I don't know. I just like it. I think it's an attractive, well thought out little rifle. It's got a fully bedded action standard from the factory. It has a thick, heavy varmint style barrel, threaded for a silencer, and overall it's a very nice little package. It's one failing, I think, and if you read the forums, most people seem to agree on this, is the trigger unit. It's not ideal. It's certainly not as good as it could be. So what I mean is this. First of all, we'll just prove to you, even though I know the rifle is safe. There is no magazine in there, and there is nothing in the chamber, if you can see down there. So the one failing this rifle has is it has a fairly horrible trigger unit. Horrible not in the sense of it's bad, it's just very heavy, and heavier than I would like anyway. And it has a plastic trigger. Now, a lot of people don't like the plastic trigger. I know Browning's signature sort of styling on this is a gold trigger, which they've got here obviously. Plastic doesn't bother me so much. There's no bendiness or imprecision because of it being made from plastic. However, I'm not a great fan of the trigger pull. There is, if I show you here, an adjustment screw for the grub screw, which takes an Allen key or Allen wrench, and even if you back that off fully, then it still doesn't achieve what I would call a light trigger. Now, I'm not looking for competition level lightness here. I'm really not interested in that. This is a field rifle, be it plinking or be it for hunting or whatever, really. But it's not a bench rest rifle, and it's never going to be a bench rest rifle. But I would like it to be a little bit lighter than it is, because it's at a level that I find annoying. You start to take up the pressure and you just have to keep going and going and going beyond the point where it would normally, most rifles would have broken, the trigger would have fired. So let's just first of all find out what it is we're dealing with in terms of trigger pull out of the box. I've backed this off as far as I can. I believe this adjuster screw is no longer in contact with the spring inside. I'll show you more about that later. But as it is right now, this is essentially the lightest on the factory trigger unit. Let's see what we've got. It helps if you turn it on properly. £4, 5.1 ounces. Let's try that again. £4, almost exactly. So we're talking £4. Let's be generous. Let's call it £4. I'd really like something around the 3 region, perhaps a little bit over, but something just a little bit less than 4. Now, the various solutions that are on the market for this, well, there is only really one, is something called the jarred trigger, which is, I believe, made in America and can be purchased. Now, the latest pricing that I looked at for that is $247.50 plus $40 shipping to Europe. There may, of course, be duties to be paid on top of that when it arrives. I'm not sure. Now the point is, really, to my view, that's not really the way I want to go. Primarily because he only offers 3 options: a 12-ounce trigger, a 16-ounce trigger, and a 20-ounce trigger. Now all of those are really much lighter than I would like. Having said that this trigger is too heavy, I think that jarred trigger is going to be too light for field use. Apart from that, the rifle cost €800, and if you're going to spend roughly half the cost of the rifle again on a trigger unit, it ceases to be the relatively modest priced little rifle that it is. So again, if you were looking at spending over €1,000, let's say, on a rifle, we'd be looking at a different rifle to start with. So that's really not the way I want to go. To that end, I've read up on the internet quite extensively about whether there's anything you can do to these triggers yourself. Disconcertingly, I read that quite a few gunsmiths won't touch them, so slightly worried about what I was in for on the inside of this. That said, there is an important point to make here. Firstly, disclaimer, I'm not a gunsmith. I'm just a gun owner and regular shooter, club hunter, the normal plinker, the normal all-round shooter. I've got no specialist skills to bring to this project, and crucially, this will invalidate the warranty that comes with the rifle. Now, you may or may not care about that, I don't know. Personally, it doesn't bother me terrifically, so I'm going to attempt it. But that said, be clear, if you go down this path, you will invalidate the warranty on the rifle. Also, I've not found anything on YouTube to cover this particular task that I'm attempting. I've found a couple of forums where people have attempted various ways to get around this problem, and it basically falls into 2 categories, which we'll discuss in more detail once we've got the trigger unit off. But there is no show and tell style video on the internet that I can find. So we're going to attempt now to produce one. Let me know what you think of it. I warn you, it is my first time doing a video on YouTube, so please be gentle. Okay, so in front of us we've got the array of tools that we really need to do this. I have been inside one of these things already. Full disclaimer, I have. This is a 22LR. I also have the 17 HMR version, identical. So I'm quite happy with the idea of pulling it apart and showing you what to do, because I've done it once already. I'm not sure if I can replicate the results of the trigger weight that I got the first time. That's the big unknown for me right now. But essentially this is what we're going to need. Simply essentially a pair of pliers, which is just my Leatherman, a very sharp knife with a new blade. This is a box cutter style Stanley Fatmax. Some files. These are just diamond files, cheap from a DIY shop. Some other ones just in case we need those as well. That looks a bit technical. It's actually just, you probably know what these are. These are Wheeler sort of torque screwdrivers. Essentially, set the torque and it beeps when you hit the thing. That's for the action screws. Trigger gauge, so we know what we've achieved, if anything. I may or may not work on the trigger sear itself. I did on the last one, I did, but we'll have a look, see what state it's in. I'm not sure about that, but if so, that's right. Stones, those are most definitely not for the trigger. Those are for cleaning up the area that we're going to be removing a bit of material from. A couple of Allen bolts, and just so that I can point to stuff and you can be clear what I'm pointing to. Okay, that said, let's get on with it. Okay, now we've cleared some of the stuff away, so we've got an area to work in. First things first is really to remove the bolt, and on the Browning T-bolt that's very easy. You just safety on, depress, bolt open, depress the little lever just behind the bolt, and the bolt comes out. So bolt out and clear. Next thing, loosen the action screws. I'm not quite sure of the size of these, however that Allen wrench fits perfectly. Lift up, there we go. Perfect. And now you can free the stock from the action. Okay. Now we probably need to get rid of the stand as well. Okay, now the bit I was referring to earlier about the voiding the warranty, you are going to see here it is clearly written, if you can see that. Probably not. However, it says warning, do not tamper with or modify the fire control system. Well, yes, as I said, that doesn't bother me too much. That's going to have to go. Now, as soon as you remove this thing, its anti-tamper foil is going to leave. It's not going to be replaceable, basically. It's going to leave a load of writing that says you've done it. There we go, with void written all over the place. So we've crossed the bridge, we can't go back, or rather, and all that really exposes is another Allen screw, just there. Okay, and now we can remove that, and it won't come out, no fear of losing it immediately. Lift it up, so did that a little quickly, you lift it, slide forward, and the trigger unit is now free of the receiver. Okay, now the trigger unit so let's have a close look at the trigger unit. The trigger unit actually is made of this nylon Some people call it plastic or whatever it is, I don't know. Certainly not metal anyway. And you will notice 3 little square rectangular notches, holes in the side plate, and this is the left hand side of the trigger unit. Obviously, if we swivel around to the right, we will see the same 3 rectangular notches, corresponding positions on the right hand side. Essentially, it is the left hand side of the trigger unit, the left hand side plate, which is removable. But in order to do so, we have to release the clips on the right hand side. Now these clips are of the sort of tang type that push through and clip up. So if you take an object such as this thing, I've got this piece of wood, you can actually depress the clip. The problem is you need to depress all 3 simultaneously, and I don't have 3 hands. So also I would just point out it's essentially made of plastic, and if you use a metal device to do this, such as a small screwdriver, you risk damaging these lugs that pop through and these clips that retain their grip. We don't want to do that. So the best solution I found for it is actually cocktail sticks. If you take a cocktail stick, you can insert it into one of the holes, pushing down the, I don't know if you can see this, something like that, pushing down these clips up in the case of that one, and wedge it in so that it retains the clip in its free position, its open position. Same on this side. This one is going to go to the back and wedge it, and then I can do the third one, and that one's going to go down and wedge it. Now all 3 are now held open. So we turn it round, and with a little bit of manipulation, I'm trying to get 3 things to come apart at the same time, and it's always going to be a bit fiddly. However, I think once 1 or 2 go, the third generally follows without much difficulty. Getting those 1 or 2 appears. There we go. So cocktail sticks are replaceable. So if you have a look now, you'll see hopefully the side plate has started to lift. So from that position we can remove it with a straight pull vertically. Okay, so when we remove this, is anything going to jump out? No, it shouldn't. However, I'm not going to promise that nothing is going to jump out. So if I were you, I would be very careful. Maybe you want to cover it with a cloth or something just to catch any errant springs. However, there really only is one. There we go. Plate off. Now, the spring that I was cautioning you to be careful of is this one here. It's the safety, it's the mechanism to apply pressure so that the safety jumps forward when removed. It's really not under much pressure, and generally you can just finger it finger, loosen it and lift it out. So there we go. The next spring to be thinking about is this one here. But I'm going to take some time now. Before we remove anything else, I want to explain how this works. Now, the trigger weight adjustment screw that I mentioned earlier on, which is there, actually works because it runs in a little brass tube, threaded brass tube, and as you wind it in, that is, increase the trigger pressure, it applies pressure to this spring here. If you can see that clearly. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. I hope you can. That is to say that the further up that spring is pushed, that screw does come out eventually, once the side plate's off the screw, the retaining screw comes out. The higher up that spring is put, the more pressure there is on the trigger. So by backing that screw, that adjustment screw off completely, this spring arm descends to its lowest possible position. The problem is, if you can see it, there is a shelf here. You can see that. Let me try bringing it in closer. Maybe. There is a shelf just there. You can see this sort of step up. It is this last step up bit which prevents that trigger arm, that trigger extension, spring extension, from going any lower down. So it doesn't matter how much you back off that adjustment screw, beyond a certain point it will be, further descent will be prevented by this shelf. Now this is, if you read up on the subject, this is what they call the lawyer shelf. This is apparently due to the American legal system getting involved in gun design and saying heavy triggers are a good thing, it means people can't shoot guns by accident. Well, I'm not a great fan of that. And personally I'd like it to be set at the level I would like. So essentially the purpose of this video is that this shelf here has to go. I said I would discuss the various potential solutions for this problem that are floating around on the internet. The opposite end, the most common one I've seen is the opposite end of this. Now this is going to be really difficult to see, I imagine. I'll do my best. The opposite end of this spring has a small right angle section which is located in a hole in the body of the sear. This will make more sense when we get it out in a moment. But essentially the alternative way of reducing tension on this part of the spring here is to essentially allow that peg to be further around on here, this sort of area on the arc of its travel in the sear. So people are recommending drilling new holes to allow this to be positioned at different places, which is a great idea in theory, but this is hardened steel. The hole is very small. Precision is absolutely critical, and you don't really have too many opportunities to have a go and get that right. There's a degree of experimentation involved in this, and I've not seen anybody say exactly where that hole should be. And even if you knew exactly where it should be, you're going to have to get it drilled, which is not a particularly simple thing to do, and certainly beyond my abilities. So I'm not going to go that route. This, however, seems a much simpler thing. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to remove this lawyer shelf here down to the level of this lower part here. So we're going to take this high part away and just allow that spring arm to descend there. Now it's slightly complicated by the fact that, again, once we get this apart it'll make more sense, but that the brass barrel that this adjustment screw lives in and ascends and descends as you adjust it actually extends to the height of this higher shelf here. So once we've got this plastic off, there's going to be a degree of filing down the brass barrel itself, because otherwise we'll have achieved nothing. Instead of sitting on a plastic shelf, this arm will then be sitting on the top of the brass barrel. So we need to file that down once we've got the plastic out of the way. Now some people recommend hot knifing this, as in heating up your knife first and just melting through it. I'm not in favour of that. I think I could do too much damage too quickly, might melt more than I want to, and as with everything in life, it's much easier to cut a bit more off than it is to add a bit back, so we're not going to go that route. Now, before we do anything, just to identify a couple of points, this is the trigger sear itself, this here, and it sits in the arm there, which you can see. When you pull the trigger, it releases, the sear comes forward and it releases that to rise, and that will release the firing pin. So we have 4 pivots that we need to concern ourselves about, 4 dowels, steel dowels, which need to be removed. One, this spring is sitting on. One is at the top there. One is where the trigger pivots about there, and there is one at the back there holding the safety bar on. So we're going to take all those out. That's essentially it. If you're going to do this yourself, I recommend taking photographs first so that you can see how everything fits back together. It really is not difficult. I know I've been given warnings about this, but frankly it's not. If I can do it, I'm not recommending you should do it, but technical skill is not high in this thing. So the first thing we can do is take out these 4 dowels. I start with the one from the safety at the back. First time you get these out, they're a little bit stiff. Now before you pull this one out with the trigger tension spring on, you need to remove that spring. A simple straight pull will get that off. Now you can see the sort of peg that drops into the hole in the trigger sear plate, and the other end is the return, which is actually where the adjustment screw places its force. That said, that last dowel can come out. So now we have 4 dowels, and nothing any longer is holding that in place. The only thing I would say now is it's going to make life a lot easier if you remove the safety button. That will allow the transfer bar there to be extracted from its slot at the back there. So what we're trying to do is essentially lift that whole thing out as a unit. And there it goes. There is a spring, as you will see, holding, see that? There is a spring holding part of the mechanism together. There's no need to detach all of that, it will stay in place, and then you can place this back later. It's not a reason to take that apart now. This is the trigger sear. And we're going to be interested in looking at the face of it to see what condition it is in. That is the part we're interested in. Now, if any polishing is to be done, and I would emphasise here it's polishing, it's not the removal of material. We're not trying to reprofile the sear or anything. That's a little bit beyond me. However, sometimes these aren't as smooth as they could be, and a little polish doesn't hurt. So whether that's going to make a difference in perceived trigger pull or not, I don't know. But it's an option that remains open to us. Now, here we can see for the first time the part that we're interested in. There is the lawyer shelf, the second raised part of it. That's a clearer view, I think. This second raised part is what we need to be cutting out, and if you can see clearly in there is the top of the brass housing in which the trigger adjustment screw travels. So we are going to look to remove this shelf down to the level of this part, and we're going to, once done, grind away the brass down to the same level. Let's get on with it. So at this stage, hopefully you can see that all I've tried to do is make a little vertical and horizontal line, the beginnings of a cut, which are really guidelines for the direction I want to go. No depth of cut really has been achieved yet, but we're just going to keep working at that line, those lines, until we remove a little cube of the plastic. And we're there. So you can see now, hopefully, we have removed loosened a little cube of material, just essentially getting rid of that extra height shelf there. We're just going to remove that material now. There it is. And that's the major part of the work done, in truth. We need to tidy up, clean those surfaces up a little bit. Now the next thing we have to do is to remove the trigger adjustment screw. That's because we're going to be filing down the channel that it sits in, and we need that out of the way. You can see that raised part of the brass housing. That is what we're going to be removing. Just the top of it, to enable the height to be the same, the height of that channel to be the same as the height that we've just cut the plastic down to. Okay, and that is really a question of diamond files. I'm probably about halfway there after a couple of minutes. So what remains now, after we've cleaned it all up, which we have done, one slight departure is I've had a closer look at the edge of the sear. I don't know if you can focus on that camera. Okay, the tool I use for this as well is that I don't want to take any metal off it. I'm simply not qualified to know if I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing, so I tend to leave well alone. That said, there is a particular, about 1mm wide bearing surface here, which right near the tip of the sear, and it looks to me like it's just a little less smooth than it could be. Now, to do that, I don't use any stones or glass paper, emery paper, anything like that. No files, nothing. All far too rough and severe for my purposes. So I'm going to use this tool, which, if anyone's seen one, is essentially a nail buffing tool, and it has 4 grades of roughness, 1, 2, 3, 4, but they call it shape, smooth, buff and polish. If you can see that. 1, 2, 3, 4 is good enough. 1, 2, 3, 4 is the order you use it in. Even number 1 is only what you'd call a mild emery board surface texture, so that's not much. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to buff it on that edge, just favouring that side of the surface against the surface of the emery board. Let's see what that did. Absolutely nothing, which is exactly what I want really. I'm trying to just gently buff this. think that's about as much as I want to do. So I'm going to move on to number 2. Of course, if you put this back, if you find that if you attempt this at all in the first place, and then you find that it hasn't had the effect you wanted, or as much of an effect as you thought it would, there's literally no downside apart from a bit of time to taking it out and doing it all again. And that's already becoming much smoother. Now we buff. That is a much more polished surface than it was before. Even if you think you're not doing anything, it's certainly smoothing out the little minor imperfections on the surface. The polish is really nothing more, I think, than a silk pad or some equivalent. Really just makes it gleam. Now I'm going to see if I can show you that again. And that done, assembly can start. Assembly really is the reverse of the disassembly procedure. Suspend the black piece that was attached by a spring to the second hole in the back hole in the silver top piece, and that goes into the trigger mechanism like that. Hold the back of that silver piece up, and you will be able to insert the safety operating lever under the silver piece and to the back of the black piece. You'll notice it's thinner so that that can take place. And when that happens, 3 holes line up. Three holes line up that you can hopefully see through there. I'm not sure if you can. You'd have to trust me. And when those 3 holes line up, you can insert one of the roller pins, and that will keep that sub-assembly more or less intact, like that. Having inserted the pin to retain those 3 parts or 4 parts of the sub-assembly together, we are now going to insert this into the trigger housing. One more part needs to go in first, and that's really just held in place by fingers, and that is the sear itself. To insert this, slide the safety operating lever into the slot at the back, and the rest of it will just drop into place, or into a place. Some fine adjustment is possible. Now, first thing to get in place is the sear rod. Followed by the top one. And when you put the safety button in, you can line up the slot in the safety transfer bar with the button. So here we are. We have reattached the left hand side of the trigger housing. We've ensured that the clips have all reattached themselves on the right hand side, and we can just check for feel that everything is working, at least possibly as it should. Now to reattach, the one thing I forgot to mention perhaps was that this screw has to be inside before you reattach the left hand side of the housing, or you won't be getting the screw back in. So remember to put the screw in before. Reattach this. There's a hook at the front which drops into the receiver and goes back. Once back in its position, you just tighten, just cinch it tight, no need for muscles. Once you've reattached the trigger unit to the breech, make sure that the safety is on or the bolt won't enter. Close the bolt, take the safety off. Now, this is where we find out if all this has been worth it. Remember, we had trigger pull of about £4. It's a generous to it really. I think it was a little bit more than £4. Now we can try, see what we've achieved. £2, 8 ounces. Let's try again. £2, 5 ounces. Let's do one more. £2, 4 ounces. So I would say considerably better. Just a little over half what it was before. And now all we have to do is reassemble the rifle. I have this at 20 pound-inches. It'll set an alarm at that. So I just listen for the alarm and while I sort of tighten down the back one first, I don't go all the way. I tighten the front. There's the 20. We're done. Time to take her out and test fire her. Thank you for watching.